The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
Want to shake up your small business marketing? I mean, really shake it up.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Have you been thinking about doing your own podcast?
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Would you like to take your business to the next level?
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
This is the golden age of podcasting, and it's time to stop thinking and start doing.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Get your message heard 24/7, 365, over and over again.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Welcome to the Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Here's the creator and host of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, David Garofalo.
Welcome everybody to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line. Let me help you bring your marketing and advertising into the 21st century. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting since 2010 and created a six-figure income from doing so. This is a 21-minute or less podcast, so let's start the clock now. And here we go. Today, podcasting. It's a game of numbers. Like any business, you need to know the numbers, the cost of goods, the sales numbers, the operating costs, the profits, and so on. The numbers are so important. In podcasting, to measure your success, one of the ways is to go to the numbers. So that's what we're going to do today. How many people are listening to your show? How often do they listen? How long do they listen? Which episodes are getting more listeners than others? And when do they jump out or off of your show? That's what we're going to talk about. All these numbers can help grow your podcast, but you need to know the numbers and lots more as we go through them today. In podcasting, there are hits, which is the number of people requesting or asking for your show. Over here is my sidekick, Ed, who is the producer of the show. Ed, we're talking about the hits on a show. You did some major research on this. Please explain to me and our listeners, the regular people, in regular people language, what are hits on a podcast.
So you don't want me to geek out on
Don't
this.
geek out too much, because these are people listening to the show that are in the learning part of this.
Yeah, so basically every podcast has a feed. And what that is it looks like a directory. It describes what the show is. It describes all the episodes. And when a new episode is uploaded, that'll appear in the directory of the podcasts. So other platforms, as well as the one we use, Podbean, the clients will go to the feed and just say, hey, is there anything new? What's up on the podcast I'm following? If they see a new episode, then they can choose to download it or choose not to.
What if you have it on automatic download?
On automatic download, once it senses that there's new episodes.
Because you're asking?
Right, because some people don't want to have to remember that. They might be running to catch a plane or something, and they just want the episodes that are available loaded on their device.
Okay. So if you have multiple shows that are on your podcast catcher or things that you subscribe to, so maybe every morning, and I do, every morning I go on there and I say, is there any shows here that are new for me? And I go on there, and now I force that button to go look to see if it does. The shows that do not have a new show, even though there's no new show, it is getting a hit. Is that correct?
That is correct, because it needs to check whether or not there's a new show.
So it's somebody interested or asking for that show basically at that point. So some people are reporting that kind of number, the amount of hits, and that's the amount of people requesting a show, not necessarily listening to your show. The show might not even, a new show might not even be there.
No, and the other thing involved is some of the other podcast platforms will also make requests, not necessarily on behalf of a user at that point. What they're doing is updating their own directory that they keep as part of their service.
And they may do that every day.
And they might do it every hour.
Okay. So if they do 24 you're getting 24 hits a day just on the podcast catcher asking for it.
And that doesn't even mean that anyone other than the hoster is aware there's a new episode until they go to their podcast provider and end up asking, are there new episodes?
This means the person actually hit the button and transported the show from the internet to their phone or computer is the download, right?
That's correct.
They have it now on their device, and they can listen to it at their convenience. That becomes a download. Even if we say we're going to go on a plane or something, where you would not be able to pick that up without downloading it, you would need to download that so you can listen to it on the plane, if I got that right.
Correct.
That becomes the download, right?
Yeah, and one thing that sometimes people get confused about is sometimes it looks like you're streaming something, but you're actually behind the scenes downloading it. The best way to do it is to understand it is visually. You know, if you're on YouTube, you can see where you are in terms of the playtime, but you can see what it's also downloading ahead.
Okay.
Right? And that's how it'll sometimes, quote unquote, stream it on a podcast client as well.
Now that stream is not a download.
That is a download.
Okay.
Because behind the scenes, it's downloading it incrementally.
As it's going.
Right.
Does it need a certain amount before it counts as a download?
That really depends. We can get into a little bit more about what counts as a download when we talk about the Internet Advertisers Bureau, IAB.
Right. So we're going to get into that. But even when somebody downloads a show, that doesn't mean we have a listen, correct?
That's correct.
They downloaded it, but not necessarily did they listen. So if you're wondering what your listeners are, it's hard to detect because you have somebody requesting the show, whether it be there or not there. Then you have them actually downloading the show, whether they listen to it or not. Then you can get even into a group of people that are listening to the podcast. Say I get together with my friends and listen to my other show, the Cigar Authority, right? So a bunch of cigar buddies get together on Saturday night, and they're going to smoke cigars, and they put on the Cigar Authority, and there's 5 guys together. That counts only as one download, yet 5 people listen to the show.
Yeah.
So this is where the numbers get crazy, that we don't know the exact numbers. And the company that Ed is referring to is a company that's trying to actually get actual numbers, and it's very, very hard to do that. So there's been some changes as recent as just a few weeks ago that these companies are doing this and trying to get actual numbers. So things are changing up a bit, and some people that believe their hit numbers are their download numbers, or their hit numbers are the amount of people that listen to it. Unfortunately, that's not as accurate as we want it to be, or as accurate as the industry wants it to be, because they're looking at advertising revenue dollars of how many people are really listening to it.
And the people who are paying for the advertising want some real means of understanding how many people they're reaching.
Okay, so there is a company out there that is trying to fix this mess. Again, who are they?
It's the Internet Advertisers Bureau. So they're an organization that's trying to get people to standardize across the board on exactly what constitutes a download. Now, they put out, I believe it was last September, a set of guidelines for how you determine unique downloads. So theoretically, if you download the same thing twice in a short period of time, that's really only one download.
Yeah, it's not allowing you to do that, so some people can't cheat the system that are trying to show bigger downloads.
Correct, and they also look at the IP addresses to see, okay, well, is this going to the same place? The point where that falls apart a little bit would be someplace like a college campus, because they're using one IP address for the whole campus.
Thousands of kids are downloading a podcast, maybe the same podcast.
Correct.
And it's counting as one.
Maybe.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is that in their guidelines, they say it's possible to create a whitelist. So what the provider would do is, based on a recognized IP address, say, oh, okay, this is that college. So these may not be duplicate downloads, but what they don't do is dictate the same decision-making process for each provider. So the providers have some leeway in how they implement it. So we're still not getting to an absolutely true apples-to-apples comparison.
All right, so one other thing is we're in the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is a coffee shop where podcasts are happening. It has wireless internet that's going on in here. And what if some people downloaded a show within this podcast studio?
So what they'll do is, and they're supposed to across the board do this, compare, is it coming from the same client? The clients identify themselves, right? So if one is coming from Podbean and one is coming from iTunes, then they'll call those unique.
Okay.
And, I think some could choose to, given a period of time, decide, okay, well, this is unique. This much time has elapsed.
You think it's getting that complicated? I mean, this machinery is be able to dictate that, or?
Yeah, I mean, it really is up to the provider how they want to implement some of those details.
And this IAB, which is going to be known as International Advertising Bureau.
Internet Advertising Bureau.
Okay. You're going to start seeing the IAB numbers of what it is, and they're trying to be as accurate as possible. So there's a little cleanup going on right now.
That's right. And some of the podcast providers, when they first transitioned over, they made it clear you might see, as much as 10 or 20% fewer downloads, even for people who are tracking downloads based on the deduplicating.
Right.
So
we're seeing this cleanup happen now. So if you are doing a podcast, you get nervous right now because you start looking at numbers and you're saying, oh, my God, what's happening? There's going to be a little cleanup session that's going to happen right here, and then it's going to you'll start seeing growth for your podcast. Hopefully that's the way it'll happen. Then we have video on some podcasts. It's called vodcasting, video on demand, video podcasting that may be in duplicate added on to it. Like in this case, the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is on Podbeam along with iTunes and iHeartRadio and a lot of other things. But also its video content is on YouTube and maybe even Facebook. Yep. Now, those numbers probably are cut and dry, I would think, but are they? We're going to get into that in just 1 minute.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Café. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Café is a live, working, full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business? Or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute, no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we're back, and today we're talking about podcasting. It's a game of numbers. The numbers are important. How else do you see the growth of your business besides tracking the numbers and seeing what's doing? Any good business is going to do that. Your podcast is or should be looked at upon as a business. You want growth. In order to have growth, you need numbers. In order to make this end up working, you need accurate numbers. It's got to be apples to apples, right? This is the way we have to look at it. Finally, there's a company out there that's helping us along the way, the IAB, and they are going to make it eventually simpler for these numbers to be so that everybody's on a level playing field, because the problem that's happening right now is some people report major numbers because they're looking at maybe hits. Other people are looking at downloads, and other people are looking at now the IAB numbers, which are, of course, going to be smaller. But what you need to know is really how many people are listening to the show? How long are they listening to it? What shows are they listening to? When do they end up jumping off? Having that information to you can help you improve your podcast, because you'll learn that maybe the show titles, and you can go back to some shows here on the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, show titles can actually make somebody end up downloading that individual episode, the show itself. Why would one be chosen over the other? Because of the way you worded it that caused interest to it. The storyline, basically, of what it is, intrigued somebody enough to say, let me download it. At that point, they've downloaded it. You're hoping for binge listening, which is somebody to go back into your catalog and listen to other shows that would be interested in it, then subscribing and becoming a regular listener of your show. And that's how you're going to actually grow your podcast.
I think that's an interesting point. You know, what people are trying to see is what's the current listener engagement. So a lot of folks are looking at how many downloads did I get in the first 30, 60, 90 days of a new episode being posted.
Right, where the majority is going to happen, right?
Right, so if you look at something like Cigar Authority that's been running for 9 years,
right,
there's a huge back catalog there. So we see about 20% of our monthly downloads are not coming from new episodes, they're coming from previous episodes.
And this is the 80-20 rule that happens in all businesses and all things. So 80% of the people are listening to the current episodes of within that past few months. That's where the bulk of it is going, and 20% of the people are interested enough to go backwards and look for show titles. There's so many of them. This is a weekly podcast for 9 years. So you're talking about over 400 episodes that are there. What is going to make them pick episode number 42 as opposed to 442? It's going to be actually the show title at that point. I think as these numbers start coming in and we're able to see that, we can get better at judging of what is intriguing the listener to go to there and then get more creative on the back end when we produce another show by calling it something.
And
yep.
It's not just the show titles, it's also having a good show description with the right keywords.
Yes.
So maybe they'll search for a particular cigar. It won't be in the title, but they'll find it by the keyword.
Right, that's what's going to help.
And have the episode identified.
And that's what part of what Ed Sullivan is doing here on the sideline. Not only is he producing the show, but as the show is going on, he's typing keywords and things that happen during the show so that he can add it into the content at the end before this thing is uploaded across the board to everything. So he's working as this is going on. That's important. It's very hard to do on your own. As you are your own producer on your own show, interviewing somebody and having back and forth things and trying to follow along with the show at that point, and then doing the back end of it also. Very, very tough to actually do everything as great as you can do. That's why I say look at some place like a Studio 21 Podcast Cafe where you can come in with all your material, do your show the best you can do, and let somebody else do the other side for you. If you don't have the means to be able to do that, you're too far away from anybody to do it, you have to do it yourself. But let me tell you, I'm sure it takes something away from the show because you just can't do everything the best. Even though you think you can, it's pretty tough. So if we are using multiple podcast catches along with an iTunes, a vodcast, like YouTube and Facebook, Ed, how do we count them all?
So, yeah, it's not straightforward. You know, when I put together the monthly numbers, I have to go to Podbean. That's where we're hosting.
Yeah.
So that'll have most of the downloads. However, we also publish to Spotify, and Spotify doesn't report that back to Podbean, but we can get those numbers by going separately to Spotify.
All right, so you add those two up.
Then I got to go over to YouTube and see how many views we got for the previous month. The other one that is not counted in there, or one of them, is Google Play. So I've got to go over to Google and get the statistics. So basically what it amounts to is most of the individual podcatchers will go back to Podbean to get the download.
Yes.
However, if somebody chooses to host your file on their service, like Spotify, they convert it even to stream if people want to stream it, then you have to go to them because only they'll know how many people downloaded from their site.
And these numbers are important to you because you want to see if you're growing or you're fading. If you are fading, you need to do something about that and turn your company around, right?
Yeah,
but if you don't know it.
It's interesting to know the targeted numbers anyway, right? You may find, Oh my gosh, we went way up on YouTube. Well, why is that? What did we do different?
Yeah. And let's do more of it, right?
Right.
Because
you
it grew.
can start to drive the numbers the more information you have.
Information is power. Information is key to know it. How do you improve yourself without knowing the numbers? It's very, very hard to do it. So the numbers are important, and that's why we're calling this particular podcast Podcasting. It's a game of numbers. Numbers are very, very important, and you need to know that. So you need to have a plan, and I have a plan. Do you need help on a plan? I'd love to work with you. I think I can help. Contact me at dave@studio21podcast.cafe. That's dave@studio, the number 21podcast.cafe. Schedule a free 21-minute meeting with me. Let me show you the studio. We'll talk about your thoughts and your plans, and I'll even buy you a cup of coffee. Next week, perfecting the podcast interview. The podcaster must become the chameleon. So that's my 21 minutes or less, and we are out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.